Welcome. Would like to thank you for sparing your Sunday to us. We're going to look at human-centered mobility and public spaces with cities on foot concept. My name is MARUF21. I am from the Mimar Sinan Faculty of Good Arts. I am a urban and regional planner. I will be moderating this session. Actually, pedestrian focused public spaces are part of our daily life during the time of pandemic. Pedestrian rights, uh, autonomous or cities without vehicles have been discussed for a long while now, and we see project developments for that end. However, during the COVID pandemic, the world over, lifestyles started to change in a radical way. And we have learned many things, starting with the pedestrian rights, the way how we should change our communication system, and the importance of public spaces, and also pedestrian focused transportation and public spaces are inseparable from each other. That's what we learned and what we remembered. So, pedestrian friendly cities need to be thought over, and we should think about how we can achieve it. And that's one of the themes of MARUF21. And we should actually think about provide inputs together to make it happen. There are a few reasons for that. First, the cities we have built so far were focused on the vehicles previously, and the transportation infrastructure comes with high costs, and it is difficult to be replaced. On the other hand, we think about how we can turn it into a new lifestyle and transform it in a more pedestrian focused way. Climate change, carbon release, participation, uh, ensuring healthy living spaces are all the steps we need to think about. Their integration again matters. Our learnings from the COVID-19 should be also transformed into certain changes that we should all think about and address together. Therefore, as we planned this session, we wanted to look at the issue from all different scales, all different layers, and listen to speakers who come up with relevant productions, because public space and the ability to walk actually means producing together, and that in return contributes to coexistence. So this interesting and multi-layered topic will be addressed by our speakers based on valuable examples. We have 6 speakers that joined this session. İman Abu Bekir is from WRI Africa. Buket Atlı is from the Clean Air Right platform. Utku Cihan is the Directorate General of Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality Transportation Unit. Mario Alves will evaluate the topic from International Pedestrian Federation, and also we are going to listen Utku Cihan from Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. Ahmet Çelebi will be sharing it from Kocaeli Municipality Transportation Unit, and we are going to listen to Cansu Gaytancıoğlu, who will be speaking from the perspective of workshop and project coordination of Repairers Club, as it is defined in Turkey. Now I would like to leave the floor to İman Abu Bekir so that we can get a wider perspective of this topic. The floor is yours, Ms. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. My name is İman Abu Bekir, and I'm the Urban Mobility Project Manager for WRI Africa and based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I'll be sharing my screen now for a short presentation. Okay, so what I'll be presenting on today will be on low speed zones. A lot of the work that WRI has been doing in the different cities that we've been working on is really looking at its importance, the benefits, with a very strong focus on African cities. So I'll be presenting on some of the examples on the groundwork that we've been doing. So when we come to understanding what low speed zones are, this was pioneered in the Netherlands in the 1980s, and it's really spread globally, and it's established a track record for improving the safety performance of streets. So this defined area that we talk about, it can vary from a single block to an entire residential neighborhood to a commercial district or a city, really depending on the capacity of the wider traffic network. And it's really aimed to improve the safety of vulnerable users through traffic calming measures, especially where there's a lot of exposure and potential for conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. And really the target speed that we recommend is 30 kilometers per hour, because there's a lot of research that suggests that below 30 kilometers per hour, the risk of a pedestrian fatality in a crash with a motor vehicle is relatively low. So when we come to see why it's important and really to get to why this can allow for pedestrian friendly cities, the reason is twofold. The first is that you have speed is identified as the leading factor in about 30 to 40% of traffic fatalities in high income countries, and this increases to 50% in low and middle income countries. And then you can see how, depending on the speed that the vehicle is operating, the driver's field of vision narrows as the speed increases. It takes longer to stop, and thus it increases the likelihood of a fatality or a severe injury from occurring. When we look at what the benefits of low speed zones are, as you can see, they've emerged as one of the most promising strategies for speed management, which really allows for fewer traffic fatalities and serious injuries. It increases the physical activity and play because people are more comfortable, feel safer, so use more active modes like walking and cycling. It improves the quality of life through reduced cut-through traffic and traffic noise. And as you can see from the picture, people are just enjoying the street space and really making the most out of it. And as people walk and cycle more, it encourages them to linger, socialize, and shop, which really has an impact on the local economy and the general economic development, and finally has benefits on improved public health. When we look at the African context and why it's important, I won't go into too much detail because of limited time, but I'll really point on two or three. The first is really that there's a disproportionate effect of road safety on the African region. WHO has, through its report, has shown that the risk of a road traffic death is more than 3 times higher in low-income countries than in high-income countries. And we're the least motorized region, but have the highest fatalities. So really, there is an urgency to bring about that change. The second is that in many African cities, you see limited resources, whether it be financial, whether it be, with the capacity and even technological advances that you see. So we really need to find cost-effective measures that bring about high impact. And this is, low speed zones are really one way to do this. And finally, looking at in the picture that you see, this is sort of a taxi terminal in Kampala. You can see a lot of the informality that's there. So really thinking about flexible solutions that you can contextualize is very, very important for the African region. So the key principles of low speed zones, these are all found in the low speed zone guideline that's recently been developed by WRI and GRSF. So you can find the details there, but I'll give some of the examples of how these principles have been applied in the African region. So the very first element is looking at design elements that can be used to achieve target speeds. So it's really, it's not enough just to have a speed limit or a speed signpost. You really need to pair this with physical intervention, and it needs to be a self-enforcing physical intervention. So really thinking about how to have designs that require drivers to maintain a more consistent low speed rather than rapidly accelerating and deaccelerating. So that's really important for safety, but also important for fuel consumption. And there's many ways, many design elements that can be used. It's really important to also couple this with enforcement, with education, and with evaluation. That's when you get the most effective outcomes. So this is an example of a speed hump that was installed in a crash-prone area in Addis Ababa. It was a citywide implementation, and it really looked at improving speeds at 10 locations. And this reduced the traffic fatalities and injuries at the locations and improved the overall safety in that area. The second element is really considering this street configuration. So not looking at just implementing measures at certain intersections, but really thinking about the entire area the defined area where you would like to reduce the speed. So this includes sidewalks, bike lanes, mixed traffic lanes, and really thinking about the impact across the network. So this is an intersection that was improved in Addis with very low cost solutions for 6 months. And I'll show you what the final impact was at the very end. But just to say that sometimes when we look at a very small area, we really need to consider the entire corridor, the entire network, because the changes that were made at this intersection had impact across the entire corridor. So this was a very important lesson that we learned. The third is really to consider all types of users and prioritize the most vulnerable. Sometimes you find that there's a lot of disagreements about who deserves the street space, and really thinking about who has the top of the hierarchy, right? So one way to get around this is, one, establishing a hierarchy of user types to help clarify design decisions when the needs of different user types conflict. So in this example, this was road safety improvements that were implemented around schools in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And you can see that street space was reclaimed, speeds were reduced so that children feel safer and could access their schools, without having that conflict with vehicles and other road users. Another element is really to be sensitive to context. So each specific context will require a certain combination of design measures, and really to think about responding to desires, to safety and need, and not really these very strict guidelines. And in the African context, this is even more important because sometimes there aren't these building codes, these regulations, these guidelines that could really support with this. So this is an example of a non-motorized transport zone that was implemented, and during COVID it picked up because there were these lockdowns and people had to use cycles and other ways to get around work. So really thinking about different ways of bringing in the low speed zones, and it doesn't always have to be labeled low speed zone. So it could have other names depending on the context. And finally, thinking about the evaluation for safety. So a very simple and cost-effective way of doing this is in conducting road safety audits and inspections. They're a great tool of evaluating the impact, but also understanding what the local challenges are by going out and observing some of these challenges. So these are the key considerations for implementations. I have two more slides just to go into the example of some of these important principles when you come to implementation. The first is really to look at low-cost interim measures. So earlier I showed you the intersection that was transformed in Addis with paint and just simple solutions. And really this gave politicians and decision makers and the public the time to really think about if this is something that they'd like for their city, right? So the interim part really helps build that political interest. And it allows you to collect data, to explain, and it was really a very successful project. And not only was it made permanent, which you can see in the larger picture, but this was even scaled to 30 to 40 intersections in Addis because we were able to collect the data, demonstrate that it was successful, and give time for the public and the government and the decision makers to really understand this. So it's really important in terms of which site you select. Make sure that you have the data before, and then also really think about giving that temporary time before making these sort of permanent interventions. Finally, really open streets initiatives and car-free days have been a really cool tool to build awareness, to build political commitment, and to really engage stakeholders. And these are all critical as you think about building and implementing low-speed zones. So in the African region, it's very difficult to make the case for a lot of these things. So car-free days are a way to let the stakeholders and the public envision what their cities would look like without cars, or envision what cities look like with more pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. And once you have that, and you have people own this and come out and play and do sports and cycle, then you can use that to build that political commitment, and they'll be behind this sort of initiative. And it's also a really good way to collect data, to do surveys, to count how many cyclists you have in that neighborhood, and then use that as a policy tool to influence investment and infrastructure. And this is very near and dear to my heart, because this is an initiative that we've been with from the start, where we had one location in Addis, in one city, and now we have 15 locations in Addis Ababa, and this has been scaled to 7 regions in Ethiopia and has been really a model for many other cities. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and these 2 publications, the Low Speed Zone Guide and the City Safer by Design, are available online, and you can download it, and really a lot of case studies and examples of how to implement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These 2 resources you shared will serve many people, I believe. Now, I would like to give the floor to Buket Adlı from the Clean Air Right platform. Hi, thank you very much for bringing us together at this session. I would like to thank the whole team as well and share my screen. The Clean Air Right platform have been together for the past 5 years, and it consists of 16 other NGOs from health and environmental activity backdrops. Here we want to produce data about the air quality. We want to ensure continuous scientific research and also provide advocacy to improve air, cleanliness, and all the topics we discuss here are included in air pollution, starting with transportation. And last week, we actually published our report, which conducts an analysis about the air quality in Turkey. We evaluate the data as published by the stations, and here we look at the health impact. This is the 4th instance of this report, and since 2017 we try to understand how many lives we would have saved if we improved air quality. And there's a striking picture, as the previous speaker stated. Actually, 6 times the number of people dying in traffic accidents die in Turkey due to air pollution. As for the reasons, industrial activities, transportation, fossil fuels burned in domestic needs like coal, construction activities, and even actually burning of stubble or chaff in agricultural activities. If the air quality is low, we need to provide solutions in many areas, including transportation. Now I will try to provide a picture of Turkey. We follow actually pollution based on many elements, starting with the particles, and they come in different sizes. The smallest one is PM 2.5, which is 1/3 of hair follicle. You cannot see it. It actually gets into the bleed, and even placenta represents PM 2.5. One of the happy developments is that PM10, which is of a higher size, can be measured by different stations, and now we have more data starting with 2016. We weren't able to follow up on data in 2016 because we had a lack of data. However, we see increasing number of sufficient data, but still 9 cities, Şırnak, Batman, Urfa, Maraş, lack data at all. although we know that there is pollution there for long years now. And how do we determine the levels of pollution? Here, the legislation in Turkey have certain limits in line with Europe, and there are guide values as determined by the WHO, and those levels have been decreased because there's no safe level of being subject to air pollution. The more you are subjected or exposed, the higher the number of actually problems, and the limits now in Turkey allowed are twice the size of WHO, and it has been decreased by the WHO. Sometimes the difference is fivefold, and this carcinogenic 2.5 PM 2.5 particle is not addressed with a limit value by any legislation in Turkey. Now I will show you our air quality map and specifically talk about PM10 contaminant or pollutant. We have a lack of data in 9 cities, but only 2 cities are below the limits as defined by the WHO. These 2 cities keep changing. We were talking about different 2 cities last year, but hopefully we want to make this table or map all blue, and we need to address industrial heating, domestic heating, all the issues together. For example, we have been keeping data for the last 5 years in certain cities, and they have continuous pollution. And on a station basis, actually in 1/3 of the year, some cities have chronic pollution. Istanbul, Alevköy, Sinop, or Iğdır or Ankara siteler, certain stations actually showed for 300 days high levels of air pollution being intaked by people. When you check the air quality, it is not enough to check the average only. We need to understand whether the pollution is spread throughout the year or not. And here in 2020, only 2 cities actually met the limits as proposed by the WHO, although those limits have been reduced later. Only 2 cities took fresh air in, and together with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen the traces of this disease, and in March, where we saw reduced traffic congestion, there was improvement in air quality overall Turkey, but in Izmir, Kütahya, and some other city, the pollution was increased. This picture tells us that if we take the measures, we can fight with the climate change, but if we have interim measures, then we are going to go back to the previous table as the dark picture indicated. As for 2020 year PM10 average, you see Muş, Ağrı, Iğdır are the cities with the highest PM10 pollutant. When we look at the source of the pollution, we see that they mostly originate from the activities there, and this means we need to apply clean air action plans very quickly. The city of Iğdır, for example, has a very high pollution for years now, and due to the meteorological structure, the pollution sinks rather than ascending. We need to pay attention to that in certain cities. Iğdır, Kahramanmaraş, Manisa, Ağrı, Düzce have chronic pollution due to also industrialization. When we look at 3 major cities, the Siteler station of the city of Ankara reveals actually the sort of pollution which is 3-fold compared to the WHO average. In Istanbul, a happy development is that the average came down for 2020. Unfortunately, we were not able to calculate deaths from pollution for 2020 because Turkstat Institute didn't announce the number of deaths in Turkey for 2020. Improving Istanbul's air quality means touching actually air quality of many other cities. That's a happy development for 2020, but we cannot provide you with the latest data because we cannot reach certain data. However, in many stations like Mecidiyeköy or Sultan Gazi districts of Istanbul, the pollution continues to increase, and representatively we see actually an insufficient number of stations in crowded districts. In Izmir, Ali Ağa, we saw the highest pollution, which results from the industrial zone related pollution. The last one I will show you, the last slide I will show you is PM 2.5, which actually permeates blood through alveoles. It was measured actually in half of the cities of Turkey, and we don't know anything about in the remaining half. And you see the map here. If you don't know about PM 2.5, you cannot reduce it. Then we need to have limits for it with a legislation, and we should decrease its values. Air pollution, the European Union wants to decrease the deaths resulting from air pollution by 55%, and we want such an announcement from Turkey so that cities can develop their own strategies, fighting strategies, and implement them effectively. My last slide is about climate change and air interaction. The hot air waves actually are more common in the Mediterranean basin in the last decades, and this fire in Adana caused a black carbon, which also contributes to climate change. So the black carbon contributes to climate change, which in return contributes to heat waves. So here we must look at air pollution and climate change together. Another ignored fact is the sandstorms taking place in cities. Polatlı, Ankara is one of the areas where we experience it, and it unfortunately contributes to air pollution. And cities are very passive in terms of making necessary warnings. For example, in Muğla in 2021 fires, the Provincial Directorate General didn't make any announcement about air pollution and about the measures to be taken. 7.5 million people die in the world due to air pollution every year, and it causes harms everywhere, including depression and other health situations, cardiovascular, nervous system are all the areas impacted by it. Air pollution and COVID-19 title shows that air pollution is a factor that facilitates the access of COVID-19 type viruses to our bodies. Actually, if you have chronic diseases from earlier years, you become more vulnerable in the face of such viruses. And last year, air pollution was accepted as a cause of death due to a litigation in the UK. That's why we should fight with the air pollution and ensure that with implementations you can visit Clean Air Right platform and learn about the details of our report. I do not mean to take up too much of your time. The floor is yours now again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So breathing healthy and clean air is important moving forward, and you explained how a cycle that is, and it's all part of that combined efforts. And by creating walkable cities, maybe we can reduce the amount of cars. And it was great to see some reduction in the pollution in Istanbul. So moving forward from that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Utku Cihan, Head of Transportation Department from Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Phuket as well. It was a presentation that improved my morale, but we have to do more together. Like you said in the beginning, pandemic showed us that clearly. This is not a joke. This is not just something to do for fun we have to do it now. It's a necessity. And transportation makes up about 20% of all carbon emissions, and transportation is very responsible, and so we have to do a lot on this, not just for health, but when it comes to designing urban space, urban environment, when it comes to looking into our cities, we have to be more careful. I also have a presentation, a brief one, and I'm going to talk about what we do from a higher scale and how we touch on space, or what kind of precautions we are trying to take. I would like to give you some examples on it. Actually, it's all about what you see here, this pyramid. Maybe you've seen this pyramid before, maybe some of you see it for the first time, so I want to explain it. And we try to specialize this for Istanbul. We try to put in the types of transportation we use in Istanbul. This is the ideal form. On top of the pyramid, you have the pedestrians, which includes fragile groups, elderly, people with kids, and we have a lot of disadvantaged people in this group, so we need a planning that includes everyone. And after that, we put bicycles, especially for city centers. We want to make them more widespread because biking emits zero carbon, and it's important to support these types of transportation. And you also have to support public transportation because they are very related. When you support public transportation, you support walking, and they go hand in hand, which is very helpful for the emissions. In Istanbul, public transportation should be at a great state. And we have other methods in between, for example, taxis, which is something we talk about a lot in Istanbul. Maybe some of you are following the discussions. It's a shared vehicle, and it's much more effective than private vehicles, much more environment friendly than private vehicles. And then we have ride-sharing systems and then private vehicles. But in Istanbul, unfortunately, this pyramid is not how it is. If you live in Istanbul, you know that with your private vehicle, you can travel anywhere without any difficulties or problems. And we try to always use our private cars to go everywhere, but that's not how it should be. Because carbon emissions, noise pollution, and traffic is huge in Istanbul and in cities like Istanbul, busy cities like Istanbul. It's not possible to find parking space all the time. So we have been trying to reverse these understandings and policies. So that's what we are trying to do in Istanbul. We try to increase the percentage of public transportation. We try to bring micromobility vehicles and also biking. But most importantly, pedestrians. We try to support and open spaces for pedestrians. And to do that, we have a sustainable urban mobility plan as an umbrella plan with the United Kingdom Wealth Fund. We have been working in the last 2 years, and we are about to complete this plan. This is the first sustainable mobility plan in Turkey. In about a month, we will launch this plan. And this is all about sustainability and inclusiveness, and it's an umbrella plan. And it's for sustainable future, and it's about revising Istanbul's transportation network. So it is based on 3 main themes: transforming to lower carbon emissions, secondly, uninterrupted mobility and integration, and third is reducing traffic congestion. As I've said before, we are trying to bring a new outlook on Istanbul's traffic management, reduce carbon emissions, put pedestrians in the forefront, and make everything more sustainable. That's how we look into transportation of Istanbul. In that sense, it's important to increase the routes for pedestrians. You have to plan them and apply them. And intersection improvements for pedestrians and bikes is important. You need to take necessary precautions. We are working specifically on that. We have healthy street applications. And lastly, traffic reduction applications. In that sense, Istanbul is lucky because according to the main transportation plan in Istanbul, about 45% of all the trips are by pedestrians. People actually prefer walking if they can. And to make that more comfortable and secure is our responsibility, and we are working on that. Maybe maybe to talk about more specifically, how can we organize? I can talk about that. We, as the transportation department, we established a small department for pedestrian access. This small department only works on pedestrian access, and they are doing a lot of projects. It's a team, and they only work on pedestrians and walking in Istanbul. So with that team, with that department, we are doing a master plan for pedestrian walking. We look at walking as a mode of transportation, and we are talking and working on how we can improve it. And we are working on a master plan. It's called pedestrian access master plan. And currently we have about 63 kilometers of pedestrianized road network, but we're trying to increase it. Firstly, we completed the inventory efforts, and now we are in the planning process. This is a bit technical, but these are our hexagons that we have in Istanbul. These are small hexagons, and we take the data and analyze it. And the yellow ones are the areas where pedestrians are having difficulties in. For example, the quality of the road or access to public transportation is problematic in these areas. And this database leads us on where to look. These are our beginning points. So we analyze Istanbul in this framework. I wanted to show you this example as well. These are called parklets. In Şişli, we did one of these with WRI, with their cooperation, with their fund. This is a small parklet. This is the first parklet of its kind in Istanbul. We are producing it now. You will be seeing this on the streets very soon. So this space was a space where cars were parking. We take that away, this space from the cars, and open it for people and pedestrians, so that they can be more comfortable. And this is in a way taking away from the private cars and giving it to the pedestrians. And there are many examples of this in the world. And you've probably seen the examples of this. So it's not just about putting in the parklet, it's all about taking all the collision data and analyzing the area and looking at the trips in that area, and then putting in the parklets. That's how we choose the location of the parklets. So in a short period of time, their numbers will increase. And we also reduce the space in this. Reduce speed in this area to 40 kilometers an hour with the parklet assembly. And again, the second example is a parklet like this. This is a mobile bike-focused parklet. This is a portable application. And again, it provides more space to pedestrians, especially for city centers. Pedestrians can be more comfortable with small additions like this. Everything will not change in a day. Everything will not change by itself. But with the planning that we do, with small touches and additions we do, we can ensure this transformation altogether. And I think my time is finished now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Seeing how you use data, specific data, on a huge city like Istanbul is very exciting. Because we have seen this before. Working based on data will take us further, and Istanbul, because of its complicated nature, was lacking on that. So for example, those hexagons that you showed us is very exciting. And for the parklets, I've seen some of them, and they are new for Istanbul, even though they are very small in scale, but they can be very beneficial. And seeing that you take data into consideration and making surgical arrangements is great. And I think that will take us forward very rapidly. Thank you very much. And with that said, maybe we can talk about the international regulations and international perspectives. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Mario J. Alves, he's the Secretary General of International Federation of Pedestrians. He can.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and I will share my screen. Yes, I think you can see it. So thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. And some of you might know that I had an accident. I will speak a little bit about it afterwards. I have only my left arm, and I'm a right arm person. So let's see if it goes well. So I'm representing International Federation of Pedestrians, and I will speak a little bit about it. And I also speak about, and this is the front page of a project called MORE, Multimodal Optimization Road Space in Europe. And before that, I just wanted to tell you in the general terms that the pedestrians are very, very important to be observed, because I remember when we were all very mobile, going around conferences around the world, some of us. I took this photo in London and from my hotel window, and I could observe this very interesting fact that there is something about democracy and public space here in this picture. You have a garage, and then you have some engineer or someone that designed a public space that gave preference to the car that goes to the garage. So there is here, oops, sorry. There is here two barriers for the people that were carrying the suitcases. So as you can see, some of the people are going to the tarmac where the cars are, just because they are trying to avoid the barriers. And this is one of the problems with pedestrians, that they are cut by thousands of cuts around, in their natural environment. So when you have to improve something, you really have to observe very well the public space. And you can see here, it's a bit of a failure of democracy, so that you are giving preference to a car instead of the thousands of pedestrians that cross the street every day. So what about MORE? MORE is about, as you might know, in fact, it goes one of the networks. So this is about the Trans-European Transport Network, which is a very, very large network between ports and strategic points for delivery. And one of them, as you can see in the corner, goes to Istanbul. But there is a problem when this large network of larger routes go into the side of the city. There is pedestrians, there is cyclists, there is public transport. And so it's very, very difficult to get a consensus between heavy goods vehicles and all these delivery vehicles, and to make it compatible with all these very fragile modes. So this, we are using 5 cities to study: Budapest, Constance, Lisbon, London, and Malmo, to study this quite tricky, wicked problem, how to make it compatible, these large streets that we need to reach our ports, our airports, and all kinds of traffic in the city. I encourage you to visit the webpage, which is in the bottom of the slide. So we have already quite a few deliveries that try to say. So what about the International Federation of Pedestrians? The International Federation of Pedestrians we are present in about 40 countries, and we have about 50 NGOs. So the NGOs vary quite a bit. Some of them are just 3-4 persons with a web page. Some of them are quite professional. As you can see here, we have Turkey now because we have Izmir. Otku is one of our main contacts, and it is our pleasure also to start to collaborate with the city of Istanbul with our pedestrian plan. And we already did a workshop with professionals around the world. So that's part of our work as International Federation of Pedestrians. Unfortunately, and this is something that I would like to say here, as you can see, Africa is not present in our any NGO. So if you have any organizations or please spread the word. We are on the main social networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all that. So that's the best way to get to know our work. And we have a web page, of course. So please do try to contact us. Even Istanbul, I know that it is in Izmir, the organization that is part of our thing, but Istanbul, for example, it still does not have an organization, so we are waiting for contacts. So what is a pedestrian? That's a very interesting thing to go to the basics. One of very interesting about the pedestrians is universality. So everybody is a pedestrian. So when you're doing a campaign, you have to have that in mind. So it can be like a 5-year-old child, can be an elderly with Alzheimer, can be persons with mental health, can be blind, can be someone in the wheelchairs. So it's a very heterogeneous group. And this is sometimes very much forgotten when we have brochures for pedestrians that they should do this and should do that. And especially like in road safety brochures, that they should look at the car on the left, should look at the car on the right. But then you say, yeah, but there are pedestrians that are blind, so they really cannot do that. And there are children that are very spontaneous and they cannot really measure the speed or the danger. So the responsibility for us should be always with the driver of the potential lethal machine. And I think that's a very important thing. The other thing that is, we are 100%. This is actually very interesting because in one way we are 100% politically. So it's very interesting in political terms because we are 100% of the voters. On the other hand, we don't have a political identity because contrary to cyclists, that they do feel like a minority that are oppressed. In terms of pedestrians, many people don't even know they are pedestrians. So that creates a very low intensity in terms of activism. And you know, I am a cycling activist, and it's amazing their energy to bring to the local authorities their rights and their opinions. And pedestrians, we only see like old people writing on newspapers sometimes, protesting, but it's very weak, the activism of pedestrians or civil society for pedestrians. And the other thing that we tend to forget as local, and I'm very glad that Istanbul is doing that, is to count and measure walkability. So what you don't count, it doesn't really matter. So that's something very important in before and after projects, that you should count pedestrians. Most city counts traffic, but they don't count pedestrians. And pedestrians, as you can see, and as I told you, are a very different kind of people, and elderly, children, and all that. And this poses a lot of problems in terms of planning, but good problems, I would say. So pedestrians are not a problem, are part of the solution. I think this is very important to know. The first speaker already spoke about speed. Sorry. spoke about speed, and I just want to emphasize one thing about the tunnel vision when you are increasing speed, because that reflects also in terms of how democracy works in a city and how social capital works in the city. When you're speeding, you are disconnected from the world. You are disconnected from the shops. You don't see the new shop that is selling new flowers that you might buy next time, and you don't see the other people. And I think that's a very, very interesting element of speed, that you disconnect from the world and you are the king of the road because you have a tunnel vision and you are basically alone. So that's one thing that is not very much spoken about speed, and I think that's very important. This slide, most of you will know, it's very popular in presentations, but in most cities, unfortunately, it's even worse. And someone in Portugal did this, because Portugal and Lisbon, where I'm based, is very much like this. And in many, many cities, even I had a photo in England that I just took off before I started, but this is actually much more accurate. So this is very, very sad. It's unfair, and it's a failure of democracy when the mighty has the power over the weakest. The other thing, and this is related to me because I fell a few days ago. I was operated yesterday, and 70 in many countries in Europe, 75% of pedestrians that get to the hospital have nothing to do with cars or motor vehicles. They are falls. And this is a black hole because this is not considered road traffic statistics accidents. So that's something that nobody really knows where it goes. So this is very, very serious problem, and I'm feeling it now. And of course, speed, I already spoke about it, but it's very, very important to emphasize the importance of speed. Everybody knows, and people that work in this know, that speed is the vaccine to create road safety and to improve road safety. The only problem is the political courage to distribute it and to start implementing it. So my thing. The other thing is air quality. We already spoke about it. It's very, very important, but and noise. And I just emphasize two things here. One thing that is strongly related with social equity. So what we notice in most cities in the world is that the most poor parts of the city are the ones more affected by pollution and the most more affected by noise. So this is like a chicken and egg problem because they are the cheapest part of the city. And in fact, people tend to have, the local power sometimes have more tendency to make bad decisions in poor areas of the city. So now what we can do about COVID? And one thing that is very important is, and we already spoke about it, is tactical urbanism, which is cheap solutions, temporary solutions. This is an example in Germany. This was Friday afternoon. This was Saturday in the morning. And this was Saturday in the afternoon. So they transformed this city, this street that was a major avenue just for people to try how it is a different street. And I think this is being done around the world. We have seen examples of Addis Ababa, and I think that's very, very important to try very cheap and fast solutions to see how people work. Otku already spoke about parklets. I will not speak about it. This was an example in São Paulo, Rio. And this is an example, this is an example of tactical urbanism in Lisbon. We already saw very similar situations in Addis. Now we'll go to the very small scale to finish the presentation. This is a tendency that traffic engineers have to offset the crossing 5 meters. But we should not do that. The desire line of the pedestrian should be the desire line of the crossing. The other thing we can do is to reduce the radius of the crossing, which reduces the speed of traffic that goes into the minor streets. So this makes the pedestrian less exposed to danger, or even better, we do cross walks that are raised, as you can see this example in Amsterdam. So you can see here, there is a child, there is a bicyclist, there is a pedestrian that can do all this. So let me just finish now. There is, according to Professor Peter Jones, that we are working in the project, 3 stages for cities, how do they deal with the car. The stage 1 is the city for cars, which unfortunately many cities around the world are on this stage. On stage 2, we are starting with this traffic calming, we are starting with Vision Zero, and stage 3 is the city of places. So we do more livability, more broader sidewalks, more trees and all that. So this is the stages that we are going through. Vision Zero has 20 years and is something that is very typical from the stage 2, but maybe we should go beyond Vision Zero. And going beyond Vision Zero is, instead of focus only in fatalities, maybe we should focus on modal shifts, to shift from dangerous modes like cars to pedestrians and cyclists. Instead of road safety, maybe we should start telling what it is, which is road danger reduction. Instead of traffic calming, which is perfect, and I myself work on it very much, we should do things more like to do with benches, trees, and less engineer-based solutions. And instead of an ethical imperative, which is very interesting in Vision Zero, maybe we should focus more on the political choice. So this is it. When politicians can focus on fun, on people, then actually it is very, very valuable politically. I give this example as my last example. I am a traffic engineer. Sometimes I spend hours if it is better to have crossing before or after the curve. And this Spanish engineer resolved the problem by doing before, after, and during the curve. So he just did all the crossing for pedestrians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really important to make the pedestrian remember that they have rights and motivate them to be much more involved in the public sphere. One of the roads is now we will pass from this scale of Turkey is another example from metropolitan city. I would like to introduce Mr. Ahmet Çelebi, Head of Transportation Department of Kocaeli Metropolitan Municipality. We will be talking about what we are doing on a local scale. Thank you, Mrs. Bahar. As representative of the Federation, I would like to briefly mention the definition of pedestrian transportation from different angles. Pedestrian transportation is extremely important in the goal of sustainable urbanization, including people of all ages, genders, pregnant, disabled, or people carrying loads with children or vehicles. And it's an issue that is decisive in terms of quality of life. In many cities around the world, pedestrian transportation is within the priority of sustainable targets. But in this sense, in Turkey, it's a little process. It hasn't gained much momentum because the work done so far has been more likely to solve infrastructure and road transportation of rail system infrastructure of transportation systems. I think in our country, urban plans are not taken into consideration sufficiently, and the plans and policies and investments should be more. We see that the areas allocated for pedestrians in the cities are increased, especially in urban centers. The areas reserved for vehicles are reduced, arranged in form of pedestrian areas, squares, streets. I would like to share a presentation with you. So, what we are doing to address this issue and what we should do. Our subject is pedestrian priority transportation and spatial public space. This is a topic that needs to be seriously addressed in terms of transportation policies, because our cities have surrendered to vehicles. As you know, car ownership and use is increasing every year. This is a well-known slide. As you can see, this transportation is adversely affected in a way in rapidly developing cities when geographical equals and zoning plans are added. What have we done so far? Since 2010, especially in Turkey, many metropolitan municipalities have carried out transportation master plans in 10 years. This work of the master plan identified infrastructure deficiencies and infrastructures, and it paved the way for more road regulations or rail system investments. But from now on, from 2020, will be announced soon in the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, by the way, some sustainable urban mobility plans have started work. And it's one of the topics that on the agenda of many metropolitan municipalities currently. As local governments, if we evaluate some plans well, pedestrian and public transportation priority transportation strategies can be determined in 5 or 10 years. I think we can sign sustainable transportation projects. So let me talk about what the SAMP is, how it is developed, and how it is implemented. Well, in previous sessions we listened to it, we learned how it is or what it is. Where I want to dwell here is that the participatory management approach is needed, which is new approach in terms of management. We can call it because it has been very practical so far, and it's really important and practical so far and open to projects of discussion in local governments and move forward with results obtained from there. As a society, there is a situation that we are not accustomed to, but every city needs to be evaluated as a whole from the past to future, and the formation of cities can be shaped by right policies and practices. I think each city has its own dynamics and its own demographic structure, therefore it should be evaluated together with those who live in it. I think right transportation policies are an indispensable element to create livable cities. Because today, as I said in the beginning, cities are surrendering to vehicles. Our population and the vehicle owner association is increasing. Every day, we are increasing the capacity of our roads at same rate. I would like to give this example with some numbers, an example of Kocaeli. Especially in this case, we see the right approach as pedestrianization solutions supported by alternative public transport and intermediate public transport. In central areas of the cities, there are centers of attraction that people want to go. But since they are all settlements, the areas that are narrower in zoning plans may also be old urban centers. Therefore, less planned areas than new areas were supported by parking solutions on the peripheries of these areas. Public transportation needs to be projected as 6 pedestrian areas fed by their power. These practices are successful in many metropolitan cities around the world and in Turkey. We see it with examples. The common problem experienced by many cities is transportation and traffic. I think this will be solved within 10 years with development of pedestrianization projects. In this process, SAM plans are currently on our agenda in Turkey, and SAM plans will be an important guide for us. These plans are evaluated with all details and elements are within the scope of accessibility and sustainability. Public transport, parking solutions, alternative costs, alternative opportunities, all of them can be evaluated. And there's another sector which is in the form of micromobility in forms of bicycles, scooters and high bicycle. Let me talk about Kocaeli a little bit. As Kocaeli Metropolitan Municipality, when we made the transportation master plan with the approval in 2014, our figures reached to 1,600,000 and our population reached 2 million now. In 2021, our journey from 2 points to 400,000 and reach up about 3.5 million, and accordingly we increased from 1 point to and the car numbers have increased from 210,000. It went. When we consider this increase in numbers, we're increasing our roads, but road capacity in proportion to increasing vehicle ownership is not sufficient. This is an inevitable truth. Therefore, with the right policies in this regard, especially with pedestrianization solutions, public spaces are human-oriented, should be human-oriented, and the movement of disabled people should be arranged. We need to carry out studies on it. In these projects, we pay more attention to the disadvantaged groups. In this sense, in the fifth five-year strategic plan of Kocaeli Metropolitan Municipality, targets have been determined in line with this vision. In particular, we are currently carrying out investments by taking into account the development of public transportation in Kocaeli, its accessibility and environmental factors. It can be lived on to future generations. In order to give us a public space, Izmit city center was free from vehicles, and pedestrianization process is still going on.
We wanted to ensure that we have the city center actually eliminating vehicles. This is a 1.5 kilometer Izmir urban center, and here 1,300 vehicles travel per hour. This is left to vehicles, and the plans here actually are evaluated in line with the policy and strategy involving all the stakeholders, and this means an important important project with a focus on humans and spaces. I would like to provide slides about the gains of this project. The public space actually is increased by 50% compared to the current structure, and the vehicles have 50% less space. And here people from all segments join this space by taking pleasure as they spend time, and many other projects are developed in Kocaeli for with a focus on infrastructure. After these streets are created without cars, actually we start seeing gains like this. Mass transportation and inter-mass transportation usage become more widespread. Normally, when people enter these areas with vehicles they access less spots, but now with pedestrians it is actually increased. So to prevent our cities becoming occupied by cars or vehicles, we want to make it a commonplace practice all around Kocaeli with a serious vision and efforts. That will be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Two metropolitan municipalities showcased their examples. They refer to population density and the number of travels, and it is a very challenging task to deal with this issue. So they need to get the support of the public behind their activities to be able to support micro scale projects. As you have seen in the 3D models, this is already out there to provide more space to public. So ensuring the public participation is all the more important. And when we look at the ones showing activities in Istanbul, we see Onaranlar Kulübü, or the Repairers Club. Cansu Kaytancıoğlu will be presenting from that institution. Sorry that I had to change my computer. I hope this is all fine now. I am a product designer, Cansu Kaytancıoğlu. I represent the Repairers Club in Turkey, serving as a workshop project coordinator there. Thank you very much for giving us a place in this session. Let me tell you about our club. It was founded in 2016 with the initiative of 3 friends. It's a community of volunteers, and the main goal is to enrich the dialogue between humans and the city through projects. One of our activity areas is public spaces, and our main premises is that we live in Kadıköy. We love spending time in Kadıköy rather than being confined to a place. We want to have conversation in the street and socialize in the street in Kadıköy. As the metropoles gets crowded and more concrete, they are becoming different from what our parents experienced back in the 1970s and 80s, losing that social aspect. And we live in offices, plazas, houses, which means a disconnect between people. We start actually caring less about what happens in the city, and we become less sensitive to issues emerging around, or we turn to others like municipalities. We say if only they had beautified this area, but we are the owners of that street. Since we realized it, we wanted to get the control of the street in our hands. That's how our movement started, and we need to remember and remind this so that we can have the expected dialogue. And Ms. Bahar, you have stated very well that it is difficult to ensure that motivation, but with small touches, by adding design and humor elements, we actually remind the residents of the city that they are the owners. We do various activities. What activities? We look at something broken, missing, or boring, and we try to repair it both physically and in an abstract sense. So on our Instagram, you might see physical things, but actually the most important aspect here is repairing minds, and we try to ensure that people or the designers are told about these concepts, that this is not that a difficult feat, that it should not be blocked by bureaucracy. I would like to give a few examples. Actually, this can be defined as our first work. What did we do here? There is this telephone box with certain notices on it. We covered one side of it, coated one side of it with paint, and then we placed actually cactuses. This might not be a huge deal, but there is this social experiment aspect. It is very difficult to predict what kind of ramifications or impact you will see there, because regardless of how much you conduct research, these creations may get into trouble. Then we had a different application. I don't know whether you are able to see the place behind. We had a dialogue with the grocery store owner there, telling about what we are trying to achieve. When we came there and visited it, we know that these two actually flower pots weren't there previously, vases weren't there, and they sort of actually put it here. That means it was adopted by the artisans working there. As we started to see those vases or flower pots there, this is another activity for Father's Day. And broken items are here repaired by popular characters. People should say, I know it from here. so that they can adopt it. And we wanted it to long term, as these would be areas where it is adapted much more easily. This is one of the examples. Again, rope rose, which actually takes us back to 1980s. We placed laces there. We placed a piece of actually the dowry set of our friends. Designers here are important, and here we should make the people passing by saying, I remember this, I have memories of it, it is part of me and it's part of the street. To be able to make that, make people say, is important for us. There was this non-functional mess in Beşiktaş Akaretler. We asked, why wouldn't it be a street fixture? And we placed it from waste, and it is still there. We have collaborations with certain brands. The pipe behind wasn't yellow, it was just a pipe. It didn't have any function. We wanted to create this Lego character, add a little humor, and we turned it into another use. Why do we do it? There is this ceramic workshop behind. As we placed it here, we met with the owner of the ceramic workshop. We told them why we do it. We get this feedback. They take photos, share it on social media, they tag us. They say, it's great that you placed it here. I smile whenever I pass. They say it was boring, it lacked any characteristic in the past. You made a day, you made my day. That's the sort of feedback they say. The scale might change. This is a 15 centimeter David statue, making an allusion to pandemic. We added a mask to a commonplace statue. This is another character application from Bebek Park, and this is from Beşiktaş, Snoopy being a child in the 1990s. But and we also have this table where you can actually have your coffee and get some fresh air for 5 minutes. This is Mario here. But maybe the most important forthcoming prominent project about the public space is the Kalamış Park Collective Transformation Project. It had a really huge scale for us. It was our first intervention in such a space. Kadıköy Municipality and Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality coordinated with us under the sponsorship of a brand. Actually, this park is very close to my house. I've been going there for a decade now. There was this skateboarding area, and the young people spent much time here doing sports and getting socialized, but it's like it is squeezed between the green area and sea. This sports area, I mean. If someone wanted to access sea from green area, that would prove a hindrance, as there was this road going to the interior of the park, and pedestrians would choose that path, disrupting sports activities. In order to better understand the issues here, we made an open call, and we also had the opinions of the skateboarders and people doing sports here. That's how we prepared our design program. Then that's how we transformed it to a huge extent, and it is still in use. I do not mean to take up too much of your time, as I'm running out of my time. That will be all for now. Thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt at all, but the counter keeps running the last 11 minutes. And we have a few questions. I mean to ask you those questions, but actually this game focused city or warning actually the residents of the city about the aspects of life. I think your works provide sort of the edges and extremes in that sense. I would like to thank all our speakers for their enjoyable presentations. If only we had time for lengthy discussions. But I have a few questions, starting with the population policies, demographic planning. I will have to skip that they ask, should local administrations can local administrations give an advice about population planning? They say, let's put aside. This question is for Mr. Utku first. In mass transportation points or metro entrances, do you think of designing stops because those people are lacking? The pedestrians cannot rest there. This second question is for all our panelists. What do you think about Chitaslov metropolis issue? Let's start with Mr. Utku. Then we can get the opinions of our speakers about the Chitaslov concept. Thank you. The reason why Artilet emerged was to ensure that by this side way, or was to ensure that we cover a couple of car parks. Not, of course, this is where the civil initiative, just as Ms. Jansu stated, can dive and occupy. It shouldn't be just this responsible should not be just assumed by the administration, but the reason for the emergence of party was ensuring that we give back to pedestrians at least a few parking spaces occupied by vehicles. Otherwise, metro exits or other areas are not the subject of our part. We actually want to have this practice in squares, and we produce many square projects in Istanbul, Wadi projects in Istanbul. We can think of them in that sense. And actually, we are revising Beşiktaş Square, and we are working on other squares, and we are changing them slowly. So Partit is not for application in those exits for metros, but to ensure that pedestrians, cyclists, scooters are integrated to each other in public spaces. We have an Istanbul Planning Agency and Public Design Agency. They produce many projects, including for Istanbul Square. So the main goal is not to apply parklets immediately there, but we execute separate projects for those spaces asked. Well, we need to have analysis, good analyses, conduct census, design accordingly, and we have obtained many projects through dozens of contests. You're going to see their implementation very soon. I do not mean to keep my answer long. Thank you very much. Thank you. As for the Chitaslaw Metropolis, any speakers who would like to think about, would like to voice their opinions about its practicality? Well, in Istanbul, we'd know that we should start somewhere, maybe not the city itself. We can announce the islands of Istanbul as Chitaslaw. We started communication efforts there. We say, let's start from with the islands and continue as such. But we are not just talking about becoming a member of the Chitaslaw network. There are other visions. There's this 15-minute city application by Paris, also having low traffic density in the Istanbul Peninsula, or following other transportation policies as part of other associations within the boundaries of Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. Can we have a direct membership to Chitaslaw network? That's not the vision for now. We have different visions, but at least for the islands, we want to have this slow city approach. There is a huge transformation in place in the islands. For the last few years, mass transportation is ensured by electricity vehicles. They lack cars, and maybe that sets an example for the world. So we are working for improved transportation, but also we continue to conduct research whether we can apply this Chitta slow understanding in the islands. Let me give a quick answer. Having Chitta slow and metropoles at the same time actually is a contradictory. Think with concepts that are contradictory with each other. We talk about intensive activities with heavy traffic, and I think it's against the format of Chitta slows, those metropoles. All right. Thank you. 2 more questions for all our speakers. One is about the emerging motor couriers or delivery activities emerging in the pandemic and their use of the pedestrian areas. The bothering situation. So how can we have more cooperation, they ask, in terms of this pedestrian versus transportation division. Also, in pedestrian focused in spaces transformed for pedestrians, we need to change the business types, and those business owners face challenges. How do metropolitan municipalities plan for that? I mean, does pedestrian transformation may lead to negative impacts? Second, how can we inspect those violations by the motorists? Actually, we know the situation in Turkey, but maybe Mario can answer about the sort of measures taken outside in terms of the motor carriers, motorist delivery guys.
Yes, I gave a presentation to a London audience about deliveries. And one thing that is very important for us to understand is that delivery vehicles have 10 times more economic value than one car with one person going to work or to visit friends or whatever. So one way that we have to understand is that the city needs delivery vehicles. They should be small. We cannot have like very large vehicles, so there should be some regulation on that. And of course, there is also methods, for example, to have places with mobile phones that like places on the train or on the airplane, they are booked by delivery vehicles along the day. So instead of, for example, having a regulation to have only deliveries in the morning, so it's a big mess between 9 in the morning and 11, for example, we have more spread out deliveries during the day, but booked by mobile phone so that we can book delivery spaces accordingly to availability. So one thing that a few years ago was very common is to say deliveries should be done at night. Look, deliveries at night is a big nightmare. Because it's noisy. There is all kinds of the unions and workers that are not in the shops, and people cannot deliver at night. So deliver at night is a car-centric view. What maybe we should do, jokingly, is car drivers alone should be only drive at night, and that would be much better in economic terms. I don't know if I understood correctly the question, but I think it was around deliveries and delivery things.
Thank you very much. We can talk about the economy of this transformation for pedestrian spaces. There is this recent example in Laleli district of Istanbul's peninsula. Those observing must have seen the examples. We were invited there to see the residents' situation as well as the people doing business there. We did that project together, but we came to see how much people shop there, how much they interact there. There were people opposing to that project, and of course there were differences in terms of hours. There were wholesalers, there were certain commercial units, but we need to change certain habits. We cannot just go there, leave a product, take a product, enter that space with trucks. That's not possible. We limited that and we created a huge pedestrian space. But now everyone thanks us because people started spending more time there. People started shopping more there. And it's economically. We are running out of time, Mr. Utku. I think the broadcast is over now. Sorry to interrupt, but the timer has ended. Thank you very much for your valuable contributions. Sorry to interrupt, but they actually stopped the broadcast. Hopefully, we are going to open the way for further discussions moving forward. Thank you very much for your enjoyable contributions. Bye bye. Take care.